Is it worth it if love is traded for a soul? Night over the Mississippi Delta, thunder split the sky. Malcolm clutched his little daughter in his arms, her lips turning purple from the fever. He trembled, desperate, crying out to the heavens. And then from the pitch-black waters, a figure shimmering with golden scales rose. It wasn't a dream, but a mermaid, her eyes blazing like the sun at the bottom of the deep. I can save her. Her voice swept like the wind. But life always has a price. In that moment, Malcolm gave away the only thing he had left, the memory of his own life. The child lived, but the father awoke as a stranger. If the lake could take memories, what would stop it from demanding the soul? The first light of dawn streamed through the thin veil of mist, painting a pale pink streak across the surface of Lake Martin. The small village still slumbered, wooden moss-covered roofs holding their breath in silence. But inside the last hut by the lake, a miracle had taken place. One no one dared believe they would ever witness with their own eyes. Ayanna, the frail little girl whose eyes had stayed shut for days from a cruel fever, suddenly opened them. Her fragile breath returned, her tiny chest rising and falling like the first notes of a new melody. A smile blossomed on her cracked lips, like a flower finding its drop of rain. Naomi broke down in tears, clutching her daughter so tightly as if afraid that letting go would make the miracle vanish. The shabby room blazed with quiet rejoicing. The mother's hands trembled as they swept through her child's curly hair, her lips moving soundlessly. Tears of salt mingled with laughter, dripping onto her daughter's forehead. No more the scent of bitter herbs or desperate sweat of the night before. Now there was only the sweetness of milk and the fresh breath of dawn pouring in through the open window. Malcolm stood nearby. He watched the scene, his eyes as empty as the lake after the waves had ebbed away. He saw a child in his wife's arms, rosy-cheeked, eyes sparkling with life. He heard the giggles, felt the warmth spreading through the room. Yet in his mind there was no name, no memory, bound to that sight. He looked on as though at a beautiful painting, distant and unfamiliar. The village soon gathered. News spread like fire through dry grass. The girl has awakened. The elders crossed themselves with trembling hands. The young sighed in relief. Children peeked curiously through the cracks of the door. Footsteps pounded the gravel. Whispers of, "God has heard our prayers," carried everywhere. They called it God's miracle, a rare blessing in days of hardship. Inside the cramped hut, joy brimmed over. Yet in the corner, where the light had not reached, Malcolm stood motionless. His shoulders cast a long shadow, his face silent, without a smile. Naomi caught her husband's eyes for a brief moment. Her joy faltered, her heart tightened. That was not the look of a father who had just seen his child return from the brink of death. It was a hollow void, as if he stood before a wall behind which there was only darkness. Outside, cheers echoed. Some laughed loudly to push away lingering fear. An old man teased, "Maybe one day she'll run faster than her father." Laughter burst forth, light as relief after a storm. But that playful remark only made Malcolm's silence more jarring. He stood like a statue, unmoved. Naomi tried to reassure herself. Perhaps her husband was still in shock, exhausted after sleepless nights. She told herself that time would heal it all. Yet when Ayanna reached out her tiny hand giggling, Malcolm only blinked. No familiar gesture, no instinctive recognition. And in that instant, Naomi faced the painful truth. The man she loved, the father who had once been willing to sacrifice everything, now looked at his own child as if at a stranger. The light in the room turned harsh, illuminating every trace of unease on his face. People still offered praise, still sang hymns, but in Naomi's heart she heard a heavy pounding like a funeral drum. The miracle had come, but it carried with it an emptiness no one else could see except her. By midday, the village began a small feast. Hymns soared, steaming pots of soup were carried in. Ayanna, still weak but able to sit, was brought out for all to see. The community erupted in faith, convinced they had witnessed a heavenly sign. Yet Naomi's worry deepened. She saw Malcolm among the crowd, smiling faintly, a brittle smile pasted on like a mask. He never touched the child, never called her name, never whispered to her as he had so many nights by her bedside. He stood there, hands limp at his sides, eyes wandering as if searching for a memory stolen away. Naomi clutched her daughter's hand, joy and sorrow colliding inside her. She told no one, but deep within she knew this miracle had not come free. It had taken a piece of her husband's soul. And perhaps this was only the beginning. An unspoken question haunted her mind. If the lake had saved a life, would it stop there? Or would it demand more from her very own family? And before we continue into the heart of this story, my dear audience, prepare yourselves for a tale both mysterious and heart-stirring, where a father's love, miracles, and the price of the lake weave together into destiny. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me where and what time you're watching. How wonderful it is to see our family stretch across the world. As the songs of praise for the miracle slowly faded, the little lakeside village returned to its daily rhythm. People still told the story of the girls saved by God as proof of their faith, as though that light had washed away the gloom of past days. But for Malcolm, the liveliness around him felt like a play in which he was nothing more than a lost spectator. Days went by. He carried out simple chores, chopping wood, fixing the roof, even smiling when he heard children running about. Yet, each smile stopped at the corners of his lips, never reaching his eyes. At times, Naomi would bring him a bowl of hot porridge, carefully placing it on the table. He nodded, whispered thanks out of habit, etched into his bones, but his eyes remained distant. That invisible gap made Naomi ache, then angry, then biting her lip to hide the sorrow. Meanwhile, Ayanna chattered away about her straw dolls or the ducklings in the yard. Whenever she ran toward her father, Malcolm only sat still, his hands awkward as if unsure where to place them. Instead of sweeping her up into his arms like other fathers, he simply patted her hair lightly, an empty gesture, like a movement borrowed from someone else he couldn't remember. At night, the village lay in peace beneath the silver moon. In those hours, Malcolm lived like a shadow. Each dusk, he left the warm home and walked quietly to the lake. The path bore deeper marks of his footsteps, weeds bending aside as though yielding to a new owner. He stood there, still, staring at the water's flat surface mirroring the star-filled sky. Sometimes, he thought he saw a golden shimmer beneath the water, sparkling like 1,000 shards of broken glass. At times, he swore he saw the gleam of golden fish eyes staring up at him from the depths, an unsettling gaze, both beckoning and mocking. His heart pounded, his hand clenched as though trying to remember something, but then it all dissolved like smoke. Whispers spread in the village. Some said the lake chose him, but it hasn't forgiven him. Others nodded gravely. Maybe the lake wants him as one of its own. Rumors drifted through meals and market stalls. A few bold children even teased him. When Malcolm passed by, they snapped their fingers in rhythm like a drumbeat, then burst out laughing. The adults scolded them, but in truth, everyone felt a chill inside. Naomi saw it all, her heart weighed down like by a stone. She tried to fill the void by keeping Malcolm close to the family. She cooked his favorite dishes, setting them before him like a gentle reminder, "These are your memories, ours." But Malcolm only ate slowly, showing no sign of recognition, as though tasting something foreign. Even when Ayanna mischievously drew on his shoes with white chalk, he only smiled faintly, no scolding, no embrace. His joy was a thin mask, hiding a bottomless hollow. At times, Naomi wanted to scream, "Don't you remember? You once carried her on your shoulders around the yard. You once laughed so hard when she first spoke, but she swallowed the words. For the moment she met his eyes, she knew no echo would ever come from within. One evening, Malcolm sat on the porch, watching the sunset fall on the lake. The crimson light spilled like blood, pouring into his empty eyes. Suddenly, a stray cat darted past, knocking over a clay pot. The sharp crash startled him, his hand clutching his chest. For a split second, he thought he heard drums pounding from the lake's depths, the rhythm matching his panicked heartbeat. He forced a crooked smile at himself, mumbling incoherently. To outsiders, it might have looked like he was drunk, though not a drop of alcohol had ever touched his lips. He was drunk on emptiness. Perhaps the strangest flicker of humor came when Ayana innocently tucked a wildflower into his hair, looking up as if waiting for a real smile. Malcolm chuckled short, clumsy, and she burst out laughing. For that moment, the house rang with laughter, but only Naomi noticed. His smile didn't last. It vanished like lightning across a clear sky. Day after day, Malcolm lived among joy he could never touch. The village believed he was proof of a miracle, but he knew he was just a wandering shadow. Each night, Naomi held her daughter close, eyes drifting to the window where her husband's figure lay etched in moonlight. She whispered, as if to herself, "If he has no memories left, is he still a father?" There were nights when the whole village slept in peace, yet Malcolm sat upright in bed, as if an invisible hand had shaken him awake from deep inside his chest. Outside, the moon hovered over Lake Martin. Silver light scattered across rooftops and blades of grass. But in his head, it wasn't the sound of crickets or the wind rustling through leaves. It was something else low, steady, like drums echoing beneath the waves. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but the more he tried to ignore it, the louder it grew, syncing perfectly with his own heartbeat. Thump, thump, as though his heart and the lake shared a single rhythm. He pressed his palm to his chest, felt that terrifying harmony, and a shiver ran down his spine. One night, Malcolm dozed off in the wooden chair on the porch. In his dream, he wandered into a golden expanse. Before him stretched a colossal city beneath the sea, coral towers shimmering, domes woven from radiant seaweed, light glinting like 1,000 shattered suns. In the heart of the city, half-human, half-fish beings glided, their skin reflecting light like hammered metal. Everything was dazzlingly grand, yet eerie, for Malcolm heard no sound but the pounding drums from afar. Then she appeared, the mermaid, with scales of blazing gold and eyes deep enough to hold the night sky. She drew near, her hair flowing in the water, her hand reaching out to touch his forehead. Cold as ice! A flash tore through his mind, fragments of memory sparking, a child's laughter, sunlight in a yard, a flower tucked into someone's hair. But all of it dissolved when her lips parted, whispering like wind. A gift, a piece of soul. Malcolm jolted awake, his shirt drenched in sweat. His chest heaved, his eyes locked on the dark. Naomi and Ayana slept soundly inside, their breaths steady as a lullaby. He wanted to believe it had only been a nightmare, yet the echo of that whisper still rang in his ears, etched into his mind. In the days that followed, he grew more aware of the lake. Each evening, as sunset bled red across the water, Malcolm heard the drums again. Sometimes distant, sometimes pounding close, as if struck behind his back. He tried counting the beats, then laughed bitterly when he realized they matched his own heart. The villagers whispered more and more. They saw him pacing the lake, eyes fixed on the surface as if searching for a secret. Some dismissed it. He's still shaken, but others leaned close. The lake chose him, and the lake will take him back. These murmurs spread through suppers, through markets, until even children repeated them. One mischievous boy banged on an empty barrel in the square, shouting, "Listen, the lake is calling him!" His friends burst into laughter. Malcolm only watched, a crooked smile flickering on his lips, equal parts bitter and helpless. One evening, Malcolm took out the old wooden boat. He rowed across the lake, wind whistling in his ears. For a fleeting moment, he saw a golden streak beneath the surface, the shadow of some vast creature circling. His chest tightened, hands trembling, nearly losing grip on the oar. When he looked again, there was only rippling water and drifting clouds. He laughed dry, hollow, and shook his head. "Maybe I really am going mad," he muttered, though his eyes never left the lake. Naomi noticed the change. She woke one night to find him sitting silent on the porch, gaze locked on the water. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, but Malcolm only flinched as if yanked from a dream, then forced a faint smile. She didn't ask. She knew some fears could never be spoken. Another time, Malcolm dreamed of Ayana running through that golden coral city, her laughter echoing through watery palaces. Behind her stood the mermaid, hand outstretched as if to hold the child back. Malcolm tried to reach her, but every step weighed like chains. Just as he neared, the mermaid turned, whispering the same words, "A gift, a piece of soul." He screamed, then woke, the cry trapped in his throat. From then on, each night he stayed more alert, yet more powerless. The drums beneath the waves never stopped. Patient, relentless, a reminder that miracles are never free. Malcolm began tracking details, where the golden glimmer appeared, when the drums grew stronger. He felt like a man being trained for a mission no one wanted. At times he smiled bitterly at the thought, "If this miracle is a game, I'm nothing but a pawn." The irony made him laugh alone, a laugh so strange Naomi grew worried but dared not ask. With each passing day, Malcolm grew more certain. The lake was calling him. It would not relent, would not accept silence. And deep in his heart, he feared the truth he could not yet admit. Someday he would have to step into those waters to pay the debt still owed. The night storm had passed, but within Naomi, another storm raged on. Malcolm's dreams, his sudden jolts awake in the night with sweat-drenched clothes, his distant stares by the lake all told her something was happening beyond human understanding. She couldn't stand still, couldn't let that emptiness consume her husband day by day. Naomi decided to leave the village. She tied back her hair, wrapped herself in an old shawl, and slipped away at dawn. The red dirt road stretched southward, endless. She carried some dry food, a bottle of water, and most of all, the fragile belief that somewhere there would be an answer. The villagers whispered as her figure faded, "What is Naomi seeking in that strange city? Or is she searching for the memories her husband has lost?" Montgomery appeared after 2 days' journey. The city was like a scar, radiant yet aching, the church bells ringing over the cries of vendors, glass windows glittering beside alleys dark as tunnels. Naomi followed an old rumor. In a small church at the city's edge lived Reverend Elijah, a pastor who guarded the legend of the Fountain of Memory. The church was modest, its brick walls flaking, its wooden doors worn pale. But when Naomi stepped inside, she felt a solemn air descend. Reverend Elijah sat at a wooden table, frail hands turning pages of the Bible, his dim eyes glowing strangely as they fell on her. He seemed a living memory of the land itself, one that had witnessed pain and prayer alike. Naomi knelt, tears spilling. She spoke with trembling voice of the miracle that saved her daughter, of her husband's hollow eyes, of the invisible drums echoing from beneath the lake. Reverend Elijah listened, sometimes nodding as if he had long expected this story. At last he rose and slowly opened a wooden box. Inside lay a black seashell, its surface carved with ancient Yoruba symbols. He placed it into Naomi's hands, his voice resonant as a church bell. "Only the ancestral drums can stir the memories that have been taken. But remember, every gift has a price, and no one knows where that price will end." Naomi's hands trembled, the shell icy against her skin. She searched his eyes for a way out, but in them was only harsh truth. No path could be walked without payment. On her way back, Naomi carried the seashell like a burden of fate. Each step felt heavy as lead. At times, she laughed to herself, a short, bitter laugh at the thought that she, an ordinary woman, now held the key to her family's destiny. A passerby glanced back at the sound, but Naomi only shook her head and walked faster. That night, she stopped at a small roadside inn. She laid the shell beside her pillow, but sleep never came. In a restless dream, she heard drums pounding from afar, urgent, insistent. She saw Malcolm standing by the lake, his eyes empty, his hand reaching toward her, lips moving as if to speak. She woke with a start, heart hammering. The shell was still there, cold as if dredged from the deep sea. When Naomi returned to the village, the sky was turning gold with dusk. Ayanna ran to embrace her, chattering about dolls and flower fields. Naomi clutched her daughter tightly, tears spilling not from weariness, but because she knew this child would be the bridge. In those innocent eyes, she glimpsed the power the lake had chosen. Naomi hid the seashell under a cloth in the wooden chest. She knew the time would come to use it, and when it did, Ayanna must be the one to beat the drum. A heavy fear gnawed at her heart. Could the memories return without bringing with them a price far more terrible? And now, dear viewers, let's pause here, hit that subscribe button before we continue with the heart of this story, but only if you truly feel the weight of what I've shared. Leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's always a joy to see how far and wide our family reaches across the world. That afternoon, the sky sagged heavy with gray clouds, as if it too knew something extraordinary was about to unfold. Naomi opened the wooden chest, her hands trembling as she drew out the ashiko drum Reverend Elijah had spoken of. It wasn't large, but its taut skin gleamed, the wooden frame carved with ancient swirling patterns, like pathways winding back to the ancestors. Ayanna, bright-eyed and innocent at heart, was led by Naomi to the lake's edge. The whole village followed, unbidden, as though instinct whispered that this was a moment no one should miss. Malcolm stood silent among them, his eyes vacant, hands clenching and loosening as if his soul dangled in the void. Naomi knelt before her daughter, placing the drum in the child's hands. "This is the gift of the ancestors," she whispered, her voice raw. "When you strike it, let your heart guide you." Ayanna didn't fully understand, but her small fingers brushed the drum's surface, curious and hesitant, as though touching a sleeping creature. The first beat resounded, and the lake shuddered. Ripples rose sharply, the dim moonlight flashing across each wave. The crowd held its breath. A second beat followed, deeper, more insistent. The air itself seemed to pulse, night birds scattered from branches, shrieking. And on the third strike, the lake exploded with light gold fragments bursting like 1,000 stars falling into water. Malcolm collapsed, his whole body convulsed as if an unseen current swept through him. Shattered images surged back, Ayanna's laughter in the yard, Naomi's hand offering him food, lullabies drifting through summer nights. Memory after memory flooded him, fragments crowding his mind until he gasped for air. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and for the first time in months, tears streamed down his face. The villagers whispered, trembling in awe. Some knelt, making the sign of the cross. Others covered their mouths to stifle sobs. They had just witnessed stolen memories return a second miracle. Naomi gripped her hands tight, torn between joy and dread. But then the lake roared. From its depths came a thunder like thousands of drums at once, pounding against every heart. Not a hymn of praise, but a ferocious demand. And in that booming chorus, a voice rose, neither male nor female, but the voice of the lake itself. A soul in exchange. The words cleaved through their brief exultation. Panic rippled through the villagers. They stumbled back, faces drained of color. Ayana clutched the drum to her chest, terrified. Naomi shielded her daughter, her gaze locked on Malcolm. He staggered to his feet. The memories had returned, but with them came brutal clarity. The miracle's price had never been just memory. That was only the beginning. He swallowed hard, fists clenched, heart hammering in rhythm with drums now gone silent. The golden glow on the water did not fade, it swirled deeper, spiraling outward in great rings. The lake was waiting for an answer, waiting for someone to step forward, to take the place demanded. Malcolm took one step back, then froze. The villagers murmured, "Dear God, the price remains." An old woman wept, "Don't let it be him." No one dared move. Only Naomi held Ayana close, her eyes brimming. She knew this path led to sacrifice. The ancestral drum had called the memories home, but it had also reopened the door to an ancient law that demanded its due. For a fleeting instant, Malcolm saw the sweetest fragments of his life, holding his child for the first time. Her bubbling laugh as she learned to speak, Naomi's hand gripping his on a freezing night. He longed to hold them all. But the lake thundered again, reminding, "Nothing taken comes without payment." Malcolm bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. He had just regained himself, yet the true price had only begun to take shape. He exhaled, a bitter smile twisting his lips. Was this the cruelest irony of all? The drum had fallen silent, but its echo remained in every heart. Naomi clutched her daughter tighter, the storm inside her surging with a question no one dared speak aloud. Were the memories returned only to collect a debt? The lake, once calm, churned violently, waves spiraling as if invisible hands stirred its deepest bed. Golden light spread outward, illuminating the shoreline and the pale, stricken faces of the villagers. From the center of the whirlpool, a figure rose, the mermaid with radiant golden scales, hair streaming in the moonlight, eyes at once gentle as a stream and sharp as a blade. The sound that emerged was neither a scream nor a song, but a voice deep and resonant, forged from 1,000 droplets speaking as one. Nothing is free. The villagers panicked. Some screamed and fled, others collapsed to their knees, clutching children as though afraid she might reach out and steal them away. Prayers erupted, mingling with sobs. No one knew what to do, for they all understood this was no longer a matter of faith, but the lake's ancient law, a law older than their very settlement on this land. Reverend Elijah, his silver hair whipping in the night wind, stood still. He closed his eyes, whispering as if only to himself, yet loud enough for many to hear. One must become the guardian. The crowd fell silent. His words cut through the chaos like a blade of ice. Every fearful gaze turned to Malcolm. The man who had just collapsed beneath the drum's call, who had only just reclaimed his memories, now stood trembling as though the verdict had long been written. Naomi rushed forward, clinging to his arm, her tear-streaked eyes pleading. She wanted to resist, to hold him back, yet deep inside, she knew at that very moment, destiny had been sealed. Malcolm lifted his head, staring at the mermaid. Memory, newly restored, brought back the desperate moment by the lake, the bargain, the frantic nod, the last look at Ayana before she was pulled back from death. He knew the miracle had never ended with lost memory. The lake had given life, and now it demanded a soul. He stepped back once, then stopped, his fists trembling. From behind, he heard the innocent laughter of his daughter. Ayana clutched the ashiko drum, wide eyes fixed on him, not understanding. Her smile pierced Malcolm's heart, cutting him with pain and clarity alike. The villagers murmured, some clutching rosary beads, some bowing their heads as though avoiding the lake's gaze lest it choose them instead. Only Elijah remained unmoved, eyes closed, lips moving with ancient prayer, a witness to laws older than time. The mermaid did not advance. She only gazed at Malcolm, and in her eyes there was almost pity, though her voice cut like frost. "Choose life, or choose your vow." Naomi sobbed into her hands. A few villagers whispered that he should choose life, that no one had the right to force this fate. But deep within, all knew the lake allowed no second bargain. Malcolm drew a long breath, chest rising and falling. He recalled every moment of his life. Simple joys, Naomi's songs, Ayana's tiny footsteps in the yard. If he chose life, those memories would turn hollow, for one day the lake would return and demand more. But if he honored his vow, he would vanish, leaving those memories as his final gift. A crooked, bitter smile tugged at his lips. "I wonder, do guardians get paid?" The half-jest slipped out, stirring awkward laughter among the terrified crowd, brief, fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. Yet in that flicker, they remembered. Malcolm was still Malcolm, the man who once found light in despair. He turned, gazing long at Naomi and Ayana. His eyes brimmed with love, fear, and acceptance. Then he stepped toward the lake. The waters roared, rising to greet him, to challenge him. The village froze in silence. Hands clasped, prayers murmured unending. Reverend Elijah opened his eyes, lifted his head, his gaze far away. He knew this law could not be broken. A guardian must be chosen, and this time the lake had chosen Malcolm. And in that moment, the whole village understood. They were not only witnessing a man confronting fate, but the birth of a legend, a new guardian. The night wind howled through the trees, tossing the torches that flickered along the lake's edge. Moonlight fell across the swirling waters, reflecting the strained faces of the villagers. All knew this moment would be told for generations, though its color was sorrow. Malcolm stood in the circle, his shoulders heavy as if carrying the weight of the world. His eyes rested on Ayana. She clutched the Ashiko drum tight to her chest, tiny hands trembling, wide innocent eyes bewildered at why the whole village wept. She only knew to run to her father and cling to his hand. Malcolm bent down and lifted her into his arms. He held her close, breathing in each breath, feeling each heartbeat as though carving them into his very bones. He wanted to speak her name, to whisper as he had so many times before the darkness stole his memory. But his lips parted and closed again, no sound emerging. Only his eyes, newly lit with memory, spoke everything. Naomi collapsed beside him, clutching his arm, tears pouring down. She knew no prayer could undo the lake's law. And yet she still hoped for the impossible. Malcolm placed Ayana gently into her mother's embrace. He drew in a long breath and turned toward the lake. His bare feet sank into the cold mud, leaving prints that the waves would soon erase. Each step cut into Naomi's heart, her cries echoing across the shore. He stopped at the water's edge. Wind whipped through his graying hair, sweat soaking his shirt. From his pocket, he pulled the black seashell, the token of the bargain. He studied it for a long moment, then let out a wry smile, one of helpless acceptance. "Strange," he murmured softly enough for the wind to hear. "This is the first time I've ever felt important." The hint of humor awkward, fleeting brought choked sobs from the villagers. A fragile spark of humanity in the dark. Malcolm clenched the shell, then used its sharp edge to cut his palm. Blood welled instantly, but in the moonlight it turned molten gold, each drop hissing into the lake like sparks of liquid metal. The villagers gasped, some falling to their knees. He stepped forward. The water wrapped around his feet, then his knees, then his chest. Each stride tore Naomi's heart apart. She screamed his name, but her voice broke, lost beneath the roar of waves. Golden light erupted violently as Malcolm waded deeper. The whirlpool widened, opening like a vast doorway. He lifted his head, eyes finding his wife and child one final time. No words left his lips, but that gaze carried everything: love, apology, and an undying vow. Then the waves swallowed him. His body sank, golden blood spilling into the glowing depths. A final flare of light and then stillness. The lake's surface smoothed as though nothing had happened. The villagers slowly raised their heads. Naomi clutched her daughter to her chest, eyes hollow, heart shattered. But then, from the center of the lake, a pillar of golden light surged skyward. Within it, they thought they saw Malcolm's silhouette, no longer a man, but a guardian, nameless, wordless, eternal, bound to the lake. The waves lapped softly at the shore, like a lullaby from him. Ayana pressed her face against her mother's chest and whispered in trembling fear, "Where is Papa?" Naomi gave no answer, only held her child tighter, tears speaking for her. The village stood silent, knowing they had witnessed a sacrifice. A guardian had been born, and in the same breath, a family had lost a father and husband. Above, the moon slipped behind the clouds, and in every heart, a single question echoed, harsh, mournful, unspoken. Is love sometimes nothing more than eternal silence? All right then, my dear viewers, if you've stayed with me through this story and found it moving, drop a comment with the number 1 or write, "I'm still here," so we can keep going together. 8. Time passed, yet the night Malcolm stepped into the lake remained etched in the memory of every villager. They no longer looked at the water as a mere pond. It had become a sacred mirror, reflecting the sacrifice of the nameless father. With every full moon, Ayana, the child once saved, sat at the water's edge, the ashiko drum resting on her small knees. Her tiny hands tapped gently, each beat echoing into the still night. To the villagers, it was more than music. It was the heartbeat of Malcolm, pulsing back from the depths. They told each other, "Listen, he's still here. He isn't gone. He's only changed form." Children gathered around her, wide-eyed, listening intently. Adults closed their eyes, letting the sound seep into their chests like a reminder. Their lives were held by the eternal silence of a father. Even strangers from beyond the village came, drawn by the story to witness the sacred moment. Naomi became the keeper of the fire in their tale. When asked, she would recount the night the lake roared, the golden light that turned blood into flame, the final steps Malcolm took. Her voice was steady, though her heart ached. "Some protect us by having no name." The words spread, becoming the village's saying. They no longer called Malcolm by his name. They simply called him Guardian. Some children even thought Guardian was a real job, like a blacksmith or a watchman. The adults smiled softly, replying, "No, Guardian isn't a trade. It's a vow." The village changed. People grew more united, avoiding quarrels or greed. Whenever conflict rose, a single mention of the Guardian silenced it. None wanted that sacrifice to be in vain. During harvest festivals, they set aside a moment to gather by the lake, torches in hand, heads bowed in remembrance. Naomi, though broken-hearted, found strength in her daughter's gaze. She taught Ayana how to play the drum not with hands, but with her heart. At first, her fingers stumbled, sometimes striking out of rhythm, drawing giggles from the other children. Naomi laughed too, a rare smile after months of grief. And in that laughter, she felt Malcolm the man who once cracked awkward jokes, even when facing fate itself. On moonlit nights, as Ayana drummed, Naomi thought she glimpsed her husband's shadow in the rippling waves. Sometimes she swore she heard his voice not with her ears, but with her heart's own rhythm. That feeling steadied her, driving her to keep the story alive for the next generation. Reverend Elijah, older now, often sat beneath the ancient tree overlooking the lake. He would say, "The lake has its guardian, but the guardian needs the village to remember him." His words deepened their reverence. Remembering was no longer ritual, it was duty. The story spread beyond the village. People from nearby towns came with lanterns and prayers to join the full moon nights. They said that hearing Ayana's drum felt like hearing their own hearts beat. In those moments, none felt alone. The young grew up with the tale. To them, Malcolm proved that love could outlast existence itself. They played games of guardian and village, one child pretending to sacrifice, others beating drums to call memories back. Though naive, the game planted seeds of reverence. Naomi knew her pain would never fade, but she turned it into legacy. She told her daughter, and the children of others, that Malcolm's sacrifice was not only to save one life, but to teach the village what it meant to belong to one another. She spoke gently, yet with conviction. Every village needs a guardian. But who does the guardian need? The question lingered, not to be answered, but to stir reflection. For if a guardian must remain in eternal silence beneath the lake, then those who remain above must learn how to live in a way worthy of that silence. The full moon rose again, and in the village by Lake Martin, Ayana's ashiko drum still echoed, carrying the heartbeat of a nameless guardian. Villagers bowed their heads in silence, lighting candles and whispering prayers. Yet the story no longer belonged to one small village. As the drum beats crossed forests and swept over plains, they carried with them the soul of water flowing ever southward. The camera drifted over vast stretches of land, following the Pearl River as it wound through the city of Jackson, Mississippi. On its banks, among abandoned houses and the distant wail of train horns, a boy often sat quietly. His name was Tariq. Tariq had never known his father. His mother left when he was only months old. People speculated, but for him the truth was simple. He was a child abandoned. Each day he wandered alleys, surviving on scraps, kindness, or coins he found. But every night when darkness fell, he went to the banks of the Pearl. There, and only there, he felt free from judgment. Locals shook their heads at the sight of his frail figure. Some muttered, "That boy is marked by the water. He can never sit still indoors." A kind old woman sometimes brought him a piece of cornbread, murmuring, "The water calls him," like it has called many souls before. Tariq didn't understand, but each time he heard it, a chill ran through him. That stormy night, Jackson was battered by furious winds. Streets flooded, lights flickered on the verge of blacking out. Tariq huddled beneath an awning, shivering, yet somehow his feet carried him to the riverbank. Something pulled from deep inside his chest, as if an invisible hand guided him. When he arrived, the Pearl churned violently, white spray bursting into the air. The wind howled so fiercely he had to crouch low, his small hands gripping a tree root. And still amid the chaos, he heard it not thunder, not wind, but a drumbeat. Thump, thump. His heart pounded with it, each beat reverberating through his chest. He lifted his head, stunned. In the swirling waters, golden eyes gleamed through the rain, staring straight at him. Tariq froze. Fear raced down his spine, yet along with it came something stranger, a sense that every hungry night, every lonely wandering, had led him to this moment. The river wasn't just surging, it was calling his name. The drumbeat echoed from afar, merging with the storm. Someone, or something, was testing Tariq's heart, just as it once tested Malcolm's. And beneath the Pearl River, a golden coral city seemed to glow, waiting for a new soul. Lake Martin had grown quiet again, but in the hearts of the villagers, the drumbeat still echoed. Malcolm was gone, transformed into a nameless guardian, leaving behind the emptiness in Naomi's and Ayana's embrace, yet also a legacy that would never fade, love proven not by promises, but by silent sacrifice. This story reminds us that sometimes to protect the ones we love, we don't need fanfare or glory. A single courageous step taken in silence can be enough to bring peace to an entire community. And perhaps that is why the human heart always trembles at the word sacrifice, because it reminds us that true love never disappears, it only changes into another form. But is that silence truly an ending? Or is it the beginning of a new journey? As the light from the lake flowed outward, spilling into other rivers, the story left a door ajar. If water could call upon one father, would it call for another soul again? And if every village needs a guardian, who will be the next? That is where part 2 begins along the Pearl River in Jackson, Mississippi, where an orphan boy named Tarek heard the drums echoing through a storm. Golden eyes gleamed in the whirlpool, and fate prepared to repeat itself. Before we close, I want to invite you, my dear viewers from across America, to share how this story touched you. Where are you watching from? New York, Dallas, Seattle, or a small town along the Mississippi River? And for you, what is the most precious truth you're taking away? Leave a comment below, share this video with friends and family, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss part 2. Because sometimes, with just one simple share, you become part of the journey to preserve the stories that move the heart.
They say, if you see a brown-skinned woman with long, curly hair cascading like a waterfall, sitting by the edge of a Louisiana swamp, combing her hair with a mahogany comb, don't stop. Don't look back. Don't ask her name. And absolutely do not respond if she calls out to you, for if you stare long enough, you will lose something. Perhaps your sanity, perhaps your soul, perhaps yourself. They call her Mami Wata, the mermaid with dazzling golden scales, the goddess of the swamp, a dual-natured creature of both human and water. Some say she's an angel bestowing blessings. Others whisper she's the embodiment of insatiable greed. But in the bayou south of Baton Rouge, there was a man who once gazed upon her, and he was never the same again. This is the story of Ezekiel Marsh, the last man who dared to look into the eyes of Mami Wata. All right, my dear audience, pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button or drop a comment to let us know what time it is where you're watching this story from. We're thrilled to have you joining us from all corners of the world. Now let's dive into the story. Once upon a time, in the heart of the American South, there was a small village nestled beside a quiet bayou, where murky waters flowed past cypress trees like a mournful lullaby from Mother Earth. There, in the humble town of Plaquemine, where the morning sun glinted off rusted tin roofs and the chime of an old church bell echoed over the swamp, a boy named Ezekiel Marsh grew up surrounded by lullabies, prayers, and the gentle splash of worn wooden paddles. Ezekiel was the son of a widowed woman who wove baskets from jute and raised her son with meals brimming with love. Each day passed with diligence, breakfasts of cornbread, dinners of grilled fish, and the crackle of an old radio by the window. The village of Plaquemine didn't have much to boast about, but Ezekiel was different. Though he wasn't highly educated, he had eyes that sparkled with dreams and a sturdy frame forged by years of paddling, fishing, and enduring the scorching southern sun. His canoe was his most prized possession, crafted from swamp oak, with a handle smooth as silk and patches on its hull like scars of time. The nets he wove by hand, and he never returned without them brimming with fish. The townsfolk called him Zeke, the good boy who'd grown into a steadfast young man, capable of paddling across the entire bay without a single break. But deep in Ezekiel's heart there was a whisper, a yearning no one understood, not even himself. For every night when the moon rose, when the frogs began to croak, and the bayou waters grew still as a mirror, Ezekiel dreamed. In those dreams, he was no longer wearing a faded shirt reeking of fish, no longer sitting in a creaky kitchen listening to water drip from a leaky roof. He stood on a grand white porch with meticulously painted wooden railings. He wore a crisp, ironed shirt, soft leather shoes, and held a glass of bourbon that shimmered amber in the light. Each step he took on the polished wooden floor was met with a respectful, "Yes, sir," from somewhere unseen. He was no longer Zeke, the fisherman. He was someone respected, powerful, whose name was remembered. It wasn't just a dream. It was a goal. It was what kept him awake at night. The villagers didn't know. They thought Ezekiel was content with his fish, his canoe, his strength. They accepted their lot. To them, Plaquemine was where you were born, lived, and died. But not Ezekiel. He saw other doors. He believed his fate wasn't bound to the mud or tattered nets. And then, one night, when the moon glowed red as blood, when the wind stopped blowing and the trees seemed to hold their breath, the whisper in Ezekiel's heart was answered. Not with human words, not with a clear sign, but with something deeper, a feeling that someone, or something, had heard his silent dreams and was ready to extend an invitation. A door had opened, but Ezekiel didn't know. Not every gift comes without a price, and not every call should be answered. That night, the sky seemed bewitched. Not a frog croaked, not an insect stirred. Even the wind held its breath. The bayou's surface lay still, like a sheet of polished black glass, reflecting a blood-red moon suspended in the sky. Ezekiel, alone in his familiar canoe, felt the air suddenly thicken like fog. But it wasn't cold. Instead, an unfamiliar scent began to weave into each breath, a mix of jasmine steeped in ginger wine, spicy, sweet, intoxicating, and beckoning. It was a fragrance that belonged to nothing living on this earth. He stopped paddling, his chest rising and falling more slowly, as if to listen for something approaching. And then he saw her, in the hush of a scene as silent as an abandoned chapel. She sat there, perched on a fallen cypress root jutting from the water, not a ripple around her. Her slender form was draped in gossamer silk, thin as night mist, the moonlight catching her skin and glinting off golden scales that hugged her hips and thighs like mythical armor. She was not human, nor was she anything Ezekiel had ever seen in books or dreams. She was a mermaid, radiant, powerful, otherworldly, and utterly real. She was combing her hair. Long black strands, silken and flowing, spilled down her back, smooth and soft like waves lapping a wet shore. Her hand held a mahogany comb, its teeth gleaming black, each stroke steady and rhythmic like a silent ritual. There was no music, no song, only a stifling quiet, and a beauty so overwhelming that Ezekiel's hands froze on the paddle. His eyes couldn't tear away, not even for a moment, and then she turned her head, slowly, as if the movement of wind and water paused to make way for that moment. Her face came into view, delicate yet sharp, at once like the daughter of a witch and the spirit of the river itself. But it was her eyes that drowned all doubt. They didn't just reflect the moonlight. They seemed to hold the stars, the darkness, and something called fate. She looked straight at Ezekiel, and she smiled. It wasn't a wide smile, not eager, just enough to send a current racing down his spine, a gesture that invited but didn't rush, as if she knew he would come closer, as if this had happened long before he was born. Then she softly called, "Ezekiel." Her voice rang out like a melting note dissolving into the night's mist, so faint he wasn't sure if it was her voice, or a thought forming in his mind. But what made him shudder wasn't the gentleness of that voice. It was that she knew his name. He had never shared his name with anyone beyond the village. No one knew his full name except family, old neighbors, and now her. The water around them, began to ripple as if responding to her presence, or rather, to the meeting of their gazes. Ezekiel couldn't speak. His chest felt tight, not from fear, but because something was pulling him out of himself, as if her eyes weren't just seeing him, but choosing him. Perhaps that night the bayou wasn't silent, but holding its breath. And when a golden-scaled mermaid calls you by name, your fate, whether you want it or not, has already begun to shift. The girl with dazzling golden scales still gazed at Ezekiel, her eyes unwavering, as if everything else in the world had dissolved. The moonlight softly illuminated her bare shoulders, piercing through the thin mist, making her form seem hazy, both real and surreal. Her long hair flowed like a river of night, with glistening dewdrops clinging to each curl, like stranded stars. Ezekiel didn't know when he had stopped breathing. Then, in a voice as gentle as a stream lapping against hidden rocks, she spoke. "What do you want?" Her voice wasn't like one mortal speaking to another. It was like an ancient song, a sound rising from deep within the earth, echoing from forgotten roots. It didn't need to shout. Its mere presence was enough to make every cell in Ezekiel tremble. Fame? Land? Power? Everything? At that moment, something strange happened beneath the boat. The water around his canoe, once still as a mirror, began to stir slowly. Not from wind, not from waves, but as if a breath from the depths was rising to the surface. Then, chunks of pure gold began to emerge, large as risen loaves of bread, smooth and gleaming in the moonlight. Next came strings of pearls rolling through the gaps in his net, each bead round as hardened tears, swaying at his feet as if dancing to an unseen melody. Ezekiel blinked. He knew he wasn't asleep, nor was he drunk. It was all real, real enough to send shivers through him. The girl remained there. Her gaze never left him, as if probing the secrets at the very bottom of his soul. No coercion, no promises, only one condition. Just loyalty. Forever. Those last two words were light as a breath, but heavy as stone. Ezekiel heard his heart pounding in his chest. His pulse seemed to hum with every word she spoke. A part of him wanted to ask, loyalty to what? Forever? How long? But those questions melted away as he thought of his life, the leaky wooden house that sagged in the rain, the patched clothes his mother still mended by hand, the scornful looks he got whenever he dreamed of something greater than the fish in his net. He thought of that July night when a man from Baton Rouge came to the village, offering to buy the land his grandfather once worked, and Ezekiel had nothing to hold on to it. He thought of his mother saying, "You can live by your hands," but never once saying he deserved to hold his head high. Now all he had to do was nod, and every door would open. And he nodded, slowly, without speaking, without promising in words, but a nod, a silent pact, as if fate, once sealed with a shared glance, needed no words. Immediately the air around him shifted. The wind began to blow again. The scent of jasmine dissolved in the mist. The water rippled as if exhaling its final breath. The girl smiled, her lips curving like a leaf gliding over the surface. In her gaze, Ezekiel thought he saw himself, not as a fisherman's son, but as someone who would step into the dreams that had kept him awake at night. But he hadn't yet asked, loyalty? To whom? The next morning, the sun rose from the edge of the swamp, piercing through the thick fog and casting its first rays onto the reddish-brown water. Ezekiel awoke on his familiar bed, but something was different. The air carried a strange scent. His skin still tingled at the nape of his neck, as if someone's fingers had brushed against it the night before. He quietly paddled his canoe out to the bayou as he did every day, but when he pulled up his net, his heart tightened. Not from fear, but from disbelief. The net was so heavy, he had to use his whole body to haul it in. And then, fish began to surface, large, fat, their silver scales glinting as if coated in moonlight. No one in the region had ever seen such fish. They had no name, no fishy odour. They didn't even struggle. A week later, traders from as far as New Orleans came seeking Zeke, the man with the miraculous catch. They brought sacks of cash, gold, and offers of investment. Ezekiel didn't haggle. He simply nodded, and the world began to open up. A month passed. The old wooden house where his mother once patched his clothes was torn down. In its place now stood a white-painted mansion with a high roof and a wide porch, adorned with wrought iron railings shaped like flowing waves. The interior was filled with furnishings ordered from the north. An oil painting of Mami Wata, the golden-scaled mermaid, hung in the living room like a harmless decoration or a silent reminder. Ezekiel, now called Zeke the Bayou Prince, dressed like nobility, real leather shoes from France, tailor-made shirts. He sipped bourbon from a crystal glass and spoke with a calm voice, as if power was something he was born with. The townsfolk revered him. They invited him to festivals, begged for his financial help. But as he walked, they whispered behind his back, because something was off, not in the way he looked, but in the way others' eyes followed him. Ezekiel's mother was the first to sense it clearly. She began lighting candles every night, muttering prayers no one had ever heard. She forbade her son from entering her room during the full moon. Sometimes she sat motionless on the porch, staring toward the swamp as if waiting for something. An omen, an old call. The village children feared him. They no longer chased after his canoe as they once did. They clung to adults when they caught sight of his shadow lingering at the market. And then there was the mad old woman, living in a shack at the village's edge, always muttering to the wind. As Ezekiel passed by one day, she looked up, her cloudy white eyes wide, and screamed in the middle of the market, "A corpse risen from the grave! His soul's already been taken!" Her cry sliced through the air. Everyone fell silent. Ezekiel didn't react. He simply turned away, walking slowly toward his car. But in his heart, a small crack echoed for the first time. Was it the crack of conscience, or the warning of a curse stirring awake? And what do you think will happen next in the story? Don't hesitate to comment 1 to let us know you're still here and eager to hear more. There are things in the swamp that no one speaks aloud, but they still slip through the eaves, through the trembling reeds in the wind, through the averted gazes of market-goers and the hurried whispers in the dark. Rumours, like the mist rising from the bayou each morning, began to spread through the village. A child claimed he saw Mr. Zeke paddling out to the middle of the swamp at midnight, though the water had risen high against the reeds. Not to cast nets, nor to check traps, he said. Zeke just sat there, in the fog, talking to someone who wasn't there. A woman living near the bayou swore that one night she was woken by a strange song. A woman's voice, deep and smooth like dark liquor, but so sorrowful it gripped her heart. She couldn't understand the words, but the melody lingered in her sleep for a week afterward. Then an elder insisted he'd seen flashes of gold appear and vanish on the water's surface, like the reflection of fish scales or something, alive and watching back. It was a night without rain, without wind, but the sky was heavy as if the air itself knew how to keep secrets. Ezekiel dozed off in his armchair, his glass of bourbon half empty, and in that sleep he dreamed, but it was unlike any dream before. He saw himself standing at the bottom of the bayou. There was no water, no air. Everything was still, like a colourless painting. Around him were coral, moss, and limestone arches, like the ceiling of a forgotten cathedral. And at the centre stood Mami Wata, not radiant, not resplendent as she was that first night. Her hair was thick and black, cascading like a shroud of night over her shoulders. The golden scales on her body no longer gleamed. They seemed to absorb the water, darkening like an old wound. She didn't speak, but her hand rose, reaching toward him. Ezekiel couldn't move, couldn't turn away. She needed no words. His entire body understood. This was not an invitation. It was a summons, a reminder, a debt unpaid, a pact yet to be fulfilled. He jolted awake. His heart pounded wildly in his chest, cold sweat soaking his shirt though the night wasn't warm. In the darkened room, the painting of Mami Wata still hung in its place. But he swore. Her eyes were staring straight at him, unblinking. And this time, she wasn't smiling. 6. Some nights, a storm brews without the warning of rain. Thunder rumbles from afar like the echo of a long, simmering anger. And on such a night when lightning split the sky and the wind howled through the treetops like awakened spirits, Zeke, the man who once nodded to fate, did not take shelter in his cozy white mansion. He was drunk, not on liquor, but on a far more dangerous brew. Power. From the velvet-draped living room to the cold stone walls of his dream the night before, Ezekiel felt mocked. He had everything, money, land, fame across the bayou, but that dream, the no longer gentle gaze of Mami Wata, made him feel owned. He belonged to no one. He was a man who forged himself. In that silent intoxication, he stepped onto the porch, thunder rolling in the distance. Under a leaden grey sky, he looked towards the swamp. The waters that had lifted him from the mud now seemed like a darkness smirking back. Without hesitation, Zeke shed his coat, dragged his small canoe from under the eaves and began to paddle, straight into the heart of the bayou, where the water was deepest and most silent. Rain began to fall. The first drops landed like a warning. But Ezekiel didn't stop. The wind lashed across his face, straining the paddle. His hair was soaked, his eyes stung, but his voice rose above the thunder, defiant against nature itself. I want more. Give me a name that echoes to Washington. The whole country will know me. He didn't call Mami Wata's name, but he knew she heard. The wind suddenly stopped. The air held its breath. Then that scent returned, sweet, faintly spicy, a blend of jasmine and raw ginger, like an old memory carefully hidden. The water beside the canoe stilled, then rose, swirling gently, glinting as if awaiting something greater. And she appeared. Not like the first time. Not gentle, not alluring. Her hair was wild, clinging to her neck and shoulders like rotting seaweed. Her eyes, once like mirrors of the sky, were now dark, bottomless as an abyss. Her golden-scaled skin had dulled like metal scorched by fire. She stood on the water's surface, untouched by its depths. The wind couldn't stir her hair. The rain couldn't touch her dress, but her words, like thunder cracking inside Ezekiel's chest. Have you forgotten your promise? No need to shout, no need for anger. Her voice was cold and steady, like a blade gliding over a whetstone. Greed without limit will be drowned. Ezekiel tried to protest, but his throat was parched, not a word escaped. Before him stood Mami Wata, no longer a dream, nor a nightmare, but reality, living, breathing, and staring into the deepest part of him. And in that moment, he realized the real storm had not yet begun. A piercing screech shattered the water's surface. A whirlpool began at the heart of the bayou, small as a crack at first, then widening into a dragon's maw. The air thinned, the water boiled, and in that moment, Ezekiel understood. What was coming was no longer in his control. The boat lurched, wind lashed his ears like a whip. He clung to the canoe's edge, shouting, but his cries were swallowed by the water's roar. The surface erupted, forming a massive spiraling vortex, and in an instant, everything capsized. The canoe exploded into wooden splinters as it was sucked into the whirlpool's core. Ezekiel no longer felt sky or earth. He was pulled downward like a leaf falling into a black hole. His hands flailed in the icy water. His feet kicked against a thick void. Darkness enveloped him, not painful, not biting, but heavy, like unconfessed guilt. Then everything stopped. He didn't know how long he'd been submerged. But when he opened his eyes, the first thing Ezekiel saw wasn't the moon or the sky, but the pale green glow of luminescent algae, dancing across stone arches like the ceiling of an ancient cathedral. He was drifting in a palace beneath the swamp, silent, melancholic, and breathtakingly beautiful. Walls of white coral rose like the spine of the deep sea. Nameless glowing creatures swam slowly, as if standing guard. The floor was carpeted with fine sand, scattered with pearls that rolled gently like perfect teardrops. And at the end of the grand hall, on a throne carved from an enormous pearl, sat Mami Wata. She needed no introduction, no emergence from the shadows. She had always been there, as if this place was part of her body, part of his soul. She was still beautiful. Golden scales encasing her form like royal armor, her long hair flowing with power and grace. But her eyes held no light. They were empty. No anger, no disdain, no love, only disappointment. She looked at Ezekiel like a mother gazing at a child who had chosen wrong despite every warning. No scolding, no tears, but worse, a silence so cold it pierced his heart. Ezekiel fell to his knees, not because anyone forced him, but because his body no longer had the strength to stand. He wanted to say something, to apologize, to rewind to that first nod by the cypress under the blood-red moon. But his mouth made no sound. Words dissolved like blood mixing into water. Mami Wata spoke only one sentence. "You have betrayed." Her voice echoed in his mind, not loud, not thundering, but soft, like a heart slowing its beat. Now there is no way back. No way back, no home, no name, no one waiting. In the mute stillness of the underwater kingdom, Ezekiel felt he was no longer human, yet not a ghost. He was something trapped between what he once was and what he would never become. But Mami Wata's judgment had only just begun. Zeke awoke to the murmur of water and the dim light of dawn. No throne, no glowing algae, no underwater palace, just the damp swamp shore, the sharp smell of mud, and tangled reeds wrapped around his ankles. He lay face down on the bank, clothes torn to shreds, hair matted, his entire body trembling as if he had just emerged from the earth itself. But what truly terrified him was the reflection in the water beside him. It wasn't the Ezekiel Marsh he once knew. The face staring back from the water held none of the rugged charm of the powerful man, nor the youthful pride of the fisherman. His skin was now ashen grey, cold as stone left in the rain. His eyes, once bright like embers in the fog, were cloudy as if dusted with the ash of a soul. But most terrifying of all were the silver scales beginning to grow on his neck, spreading down his back and arms, glinting like moonlight under a curse. Each step he took on land was a labour. No one waited for his return. No one cheered in joy. The white mansion, once his pride, now stood covered in green moss. Shutters hung loose, the roof rotted, and weeds overran the steps, reclaiming what belonged to the earth. The villagers saw him and silently turned away. No one greeted him. No one dared come near. The children who once feared him had grown, but they still took detours if they glimpsed his shadow by the swamp's edge. The elders lowered their heads to avoid his gaze, as if his presence was a wound yet to heal. And his mother, the old woman who lit candles and prayed each night, was no longer in this world to forgive or scold. Ezekiel said nothing, no excuses, no pleas. He knew any words now were mere whispers in the wind, for what he had lost could not be regained. Day after day he lived like a shadow between two worlds, no longer human, yet not a free spirit. And then the legend began. They say that when the full moon hangs over the swamp like the eye of a deity, a figure stands silently by the water's edge, tall, motionless, tattered clothes fluttering in the breeze, eyes unblinking, saying nothing, only staring toward the horizon where water and sky become one. Some believe it's Ezekiel's restless ghost, unable to find peace. Others say he's cursed to forever guard the swamp for Mami Wata, the golden-scaled mermaid, both his benefactor and his judge of greed. Some curious souls have tried calling Zeke under the moonlight, but afterward, no one saw them return. The White House still stands, a relic of forgotten pride, and in the wind, in the faint glimmers on the water's surface, people still believe Mami Wata, the mermaid whose gaze pierces the heart, is still waiting, and Ezekiel Marsh is a living warning to anyone who dares answer when she calls their name. In the darkness of the Louisiana swamp, sometimes it doesn't take a death to end someone's life. Sometimes it only takes a nod at the wrong moment. The story of Ezekiel Marsh is not just a legend of an ambitious man cursed. It's a profound reminder that everything we desire comes with a price, and some gifts, no matter how dazzling, should not be touched if our hearts still harbour doubt, anger, or ingratitude. Within each of us lies a piece of Ezekiel, a dream to rise above our circumstances, a moment facing temptation, a time we forget the promises we made to ourselves. But the greatest lesson of this story isn't in the punishment. It's in the initial choice. To whom are we loyal and for what? Do you hear the song beneath the swamp? Do you see the golden glint when the moon rises? Perhaps Mami Wata is still there, waiting for someone new. Another soul daring to answer her call. If you want part 2, where a child from the village grows up with warnings about Zeke and dares to face the curse, leave a comment below. Do you think a soul can be redeemed? What would you do if you stood before Mami Wata's gaze? Let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to leave a comment and share this story with someone you trust will listen with their whole heart. And if you want more legends like this, share this story with your friends and family in the US. Hit subscribe and every full moon will bring you another tale.